Every parent's greatest fear is for their children. From accidents and injuries to abductions, the world is a dangerous place for the most vulnerable members of society. And those dangers are doubly frightening when they come not from the outside world, but from within the child itself. What if there's something wrong with my son or daughter? What if they're not like other kids? What if they're not normal? This fear has been driving an alarming increase in children being diagnosed with and treated for mental disorders. Today, about 1 in 9 children in the US is diagnosed with ADHD, a rate that has more than doubled since the 1980s. From 2016 to 2020, the number of children diagnosed with anxiety rose by 29%, while diagnosis of depression rose by 27%, a significant increase in just a 4-year period. Once diagnosed, children are typically treated with pharmaceuticals. In the US, about 1 in 12 children under the age of 17 is on some sort of drug designed to combat mental illness, from antidepressants to antipsychotics to ADHD medications like Ritalin and Adderall. This number has been rising in recent years, not just in America, but also in Britain, where there has been a 41% increase in children on antidepressants over just a 4-year period. The COVID lockdowns have further exacerbated this situation by isolating children from their friends, outdoor play, recreational activities, making the situation even worse. There are multiple ways to interpret this data. Either children are becoming much more troubled than they used to be, in which case we have a huge societal problem that needs to be addressed, or maybe they were always like this, and it's only modern medicine that is finally able to do something about it. The third, and in my opinion most likely option, is that we're dealing not with an epidemic of mental illness, but rather an epidemic of medicalizing childhood behavior. The over-medicalization of children for behavioral issues finds historical parallels in the past. In the mid-20th century, the use of lobotomy emerged as a treatment for behavioral and mental health conditions. Lobotomy involved damaging connections in the prefrontal cortex of the brain and was used to control and modify problematic behaviors, resulting in severe cognitive impairments and personality changes. Similarly, in the 19th and 20th centuries, troublesome children were often institutionalized, confined to mental institutions where their behavior was managed through strict routines and limited interaction with the outside world. The medicalization of hysterical girls during that time is another parallel. Girls expressing emotional distress or exhibiting behaviors outside societal norms were diagnosed as hysterical and subjected to treatments such as rest cures or even hysterectomies. These historical examples illustrate the detrimental consequences of attempting to control and pathologize childhood behavior through extreme interventions. Nowadays, the practice of over-medicalizing childhood behavior has become commonplace.
You didn't go to the doctor before if your kid misbehaved. You went to your sister-in-law, or you went to your clergyman, or you went to your to the Reader's Digest, or in other words, eventually over time we evolved and we go to the doctor. That's in itself a huge cultural change.
Now they turn to doctors and psychiatrists. However, unlike a physical disease, mental disorders are diagnosed purely based on behavior. A child who talks too much or too little, who refuses to sit still, who's disobedient, violent, or destructive, who prefers their own company to that of other children, may be given a diagnosis and medicated without considering other potential reasons for their actions. Take, for example, the case of attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, which is often diagnosed in young children, especially boys, who have difficulty paying attention in school. Such a diagnosis assumes that a normal child ought to be able to sit at a desk for 6 hours a day, being still and quiet while paying close attention to some adult talking about mathematics or diagramming sentences. We forget that the US school system was originally designed to teach future factory workers to be punctual, docile, and sober. Refusal to do this is regarded as a mental health problem in need of correction through medication, rather than a perfectly natural response to a highly unnatural institution. Humans did not evolve sitting in classrooms, but running around, outside, playing, fighting, hunting, gathering, farming, and exploring. The elementary school is a modern invention, and yet instead of adapting education to human nature, we expect children to adapt to it, drugging them into compliance when they can't or won't do it. The Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of the American Psychiatric Association lists and categorizes around 70 childhood disorders, a number which is expanding all the time. The most recent edition, the DSM-5, added 2 new childhood disorders: social communication disorder, characterized by difficulties in communicating, and disruptive mood dysregulation disorder, characterized by persistent irritability. Other disorders include conduct disorder, which the DSM defines as a repetitive and persistent pattern of behavior that violates either the rights of others or major age-appropriate societal norms or rules. And oppositional defiant disorder, defined as a frequent and persistent pattern of angry, irritable mood, argumentative, defiant behavior, or vindictiveness that may significantly impair social functioning. In another time, children violating social norms, norms which they have barely had time to understand, much less internalize, and disobeying their parents would have been considered pretty normal, if perhaps a little naughty. Now they are regarded as needing medical intervention. Other behaviors classified as disorders by the DSM include anxiety in social situations, anxiety over being separated from one's parents, and manic episodes. Personally, I would be more worried about a child who wasn't occasionally manic or anxious. Thomas Saz, a psychiatrist and prominent champion for the rights of mental patients, sums up the problem in just a few words. A child's mental illness is simply behavior that upsets the adults who have legal authority and power to define and control him. After all, if the goal of treatment is to produce normal behavior, we first have to ask what normal behavior even looks like. Kids are weird, unpredictable creatures, trying to understand the strange and often frightening world around them. They often don't know what's expected of them, how they behave, or how to treat others. They have to be taught these things, slowly and painstakingly over the course of several years. They sometimes have trouble expressing or even understanding their own feelings, many of which are new and confusing to them. Sometimes when a child acts out or misbehaves, it's because they don't know how else to express their wants or needs. The American Academy of Pediatrics has also played a significant role in the medicalization of children. While the AAP claims to prioritize the health and well-being of all children, recent actions have raised concerns among many medical professionals. By endorsing practices such as early gender transitioning of kids and advocating for the use of pharmaceutical interventions to address behavioral challenges, the AAP has contributed to the growing medicalization of childhood. Furthermore, the AAP's enthusiastic endorsement of the COVID vaccine for children, despite potential risks such as myocarditis in young males, reflects a broader pattern of medicalizing children without fully considering the long-term consequences. It's easy to forget how powerless children are in society. In most cases, they have virtually no control over their lives, being told when to eat, when to sleep, and what to study. They also cannot legally consent, which means that any treatment they may undergo is by definition involuntary. If an 18-year-old cannot be trusted to have a beer, it's ridiculous to suppose that they can decide to take psychoactive drugs like antidepressants or Ritalin. Parents make these decisions, and their children must obey, whether they like it or not. Peter Ghosh from the University of Copenhagen points out that there is little distinction between ADHD drugs and amphetamines.
What we do to children with psychiatric drugs nowadays, I think, is a crime. It's a crime against humanity. These small developing brains shouldn't be treated with alcohol. Parents wouldn't do that. They shouldn't be treated with marijuana, which is also a dangerous substance, or street drugs, cocaine and so on. So why on earth do we treat so many of them with psychiatric drugs? Some ADHD drugs, they are amphetamine, so if you get it on prescription, it's all fine. If you buy it in the streets, it's illegal. It doesn't make any sense. These drugs are generally harmful for the children's brains, and the benefits are usually quite doubtful. If you ask me, I think we should not treat children with psychiatric drugs. We make matters worse by doing this.
Since all drugs have side effects, and since any change in behavior is considered a potential disorder, children can get caught up in a vicious cycle, where the side effects of one medication can lead to the diagnosis and treatment of another, with doctors claiming that the drugs are working to reveal some hitherto hidden underlying problem. Parents have been put in an impossible decision. They're told to trust the experts, including doctors, psychiatrists, government health authorities, and pharmaceutical companies, who are universally stoking their fears and recommending ever more drugs as the only cure. When the price of being wrong is so high, who can blame parents for doing what they're told? But there's a price for over-medication too, a very high one. Parents have an obligation to protect and care for the helpless, fragile beings they bring into the world. Chemically sedating a child just because his behavior is difficult or bothersome not only neglects that obligation, but violates the oath that every medical professional is required to swear. First, do no harm.